The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail as Abigail Porter clutched her swollen belly and prayed for the wagon to reach Columbus, New Mexico, before her time came. At 8 months pregnant and newly widowed, she was fleeing east from the Arizona Territory with nothing but a trunk of belongings and desperate hopes for a new beginning. "Just a few more hours," she whispered to her unborn child, dabbing sweat from her brow with a handkerchief. The 2 mules pulling her modest wagon trudged forward, kicking up clouds of dust that settled on her gray traveling dress. The year was 1885, and the promise of a teaching position in Columbus represented her last chance at independence. Abigail had lost her husband Thomas 4 months prior to a mining accident. The company had given her 2 weeks to vacate their small company housing before another worker's family would move in. With no family in the territory, and her condition preventing most forms of employment, the letter from her late mother's friend offering her the teaching position had seemed like divine intervention. The first contraction hit unexpectedly, causing Abigail to gasp and grip the edge of the wooden seat. "Not yet, little one," she pleaded. "We're still miles from town." The mules sensed her distress, growing skittish as she struggled to maintain control of the reins. The second contraction came harder, and in her pain, she failed to notice the steep drop-off to her right until the wagon wheel caught on a loose rock. The mules panicked, veering sharply and sending the wagon careening toward the edge of the trail. Abigail screamed as the wagon tipped, then tumbled. She felt herself airborne for a terrifying moment before everything went black. Quentin Foster pushed his hat back and squinted at the horizon. The cattle drive had gone too smoothly, if a man was honest about it. 3 days without incident made him suspicious. 28 years living in the territories had taught him that trouble had a way of finding a man when he least expected it. "Trails clear up ahead, boss," called Hank, one of the younger cowboys riding point. "Should make Columbus by nightfall." Quentin nodded, scratching at his beard. His cattle operation was modest but growing 30 head to sell in Columbus before winter set in. He'd built his ranch from nothing after the war, and at 33 he was finally seeing the fruits of his labor. "Something don't feel right," he muttered, more to himself than to his 3 hired hands. As if confirming his instincts, a distant scream carried on the wind. Quentin reacted instantly, spurring his horse forward. "Keep the herd moving," he shouted to his men. "I'll catch up." He rode hard toward the sound, cresting a small rise to see the aftermath below a wagon overturned at the bottom of a shallow ravine, one wheel still spinning lazily in the air. The mules that had pulled it were straining against their harnesses, braying in panic. Quentin dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, sliding down the embankment with his hand on his pistol. Bandits weren't uncommon in these parts, though attacking a lone wagon seemed desperate even for outlaws. "Hello? Anybody hurt?" he called, approaching cautiously. A moan answered him from beneath the overturned wagon. Drawing closer, he saw a woman's hand reaching out from the wreckage. "Hold on, madam," Quentin called, holstering his pistol and rushing to the wagon. He found a small opening in the wreckage and peered inside to see a young woman, perhaps mid-20s, pinned beneath a trunk. Her face was pale and streaked with dirt, but her eyes fluttered open at his approach. "Help," she whispered. "The baby, it's coming." Quentin's blood ran cold. "Baby. Your baby's in there too?" "No," she gasped, her face contorting with pain. "My baby is coming. Now." Understanding dawned on Quentin with horrifying clarity. The woman was in labor. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph," he muttered, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "Let me get you out of there first." With considerable effort, Quentin shifted the wooden trunk that had her partially pinned. The woman cried out as he freed her, another contraction clearly taking hold. "What's your name, madam?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Abigail," she managed between breaths. "Abigail Porter, Miss Porter, I'm Quentin Foster. We need to get you comfortable. That baby's not waiting for Columbus." Abigail's eyes widened with fear. "No, I can't not here." Another contraction seized her, this one stronger than the last, cutting off her protest. Quentin worked quickly, assessing the wagon. The canvas cover had partially collapsed but was still intact enough to provide shelter. He cleared debris, using his saddle blanket and her quilts from the trunk to create a makeshift bed within the wreckage. "I've helped birth calves and foals," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt as he helped her onto the blankets. "Can't imagine it's all that different." Abigail let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "I suppose we'll find out," she said, gripping his hand with surprising strength as another contraction hit. Quentin worked to untie the mules, securing them to a nearby tree with access to water from a small stream. He then returned to find Abigail's face contorted in pain, her knuckles white as she gripped the quilts. "How far apart are these pains coming?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Minutes," she gasped. "It's happening too fast." Quentin swallowed hard. He'd never delivered a human baby before. Hell, he'd barely spoken to women in the past few years, preferring the solitude of his ranch to town socials and dances. But he couldn't abandon this woman and her child. "I'll need to." He gestured vaguely, his face reddening. Abigail nodded, understanding what he couldn't articulate. "There's no choice," she whispered. Quentin moved to examine her, fighting his embarrassment for her sake. "The baby's coming fast," he confirmed, his mouth dry with nerves. "Next contraction, you'll need to push." As if on cue, Abigail cried out, bearing down with all her strength. Quentin positioned himself, trying to remember everything he'd ever overheard about childbirth from the married hands on his ranch. "I can see the head," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "You're doing fine, Miss Porter. Just keep pushing when it feels right." The next hour passed in a blur of pain and effort for Abigail, while Quentin found himself caught between fear and determination. When the baby finally slipped into his waiting hands, a tiny, squalling boy with a shock of dark hair, he felt something shift inside him, as though the world had tilted on its axis. "You have a son," he told Abigail, wrapping the infant in a clean shirt from his saddlebag. "A healthy boy." Tears streamed down Abigail's face as Quentin placed the baby in her arms. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought we were going to die out here." "Not on my watch," Quentin replied, helping her adjust the baby to her breast. He averted his eyes to give her privacy, busying himself with preparing a small fire outside the wagon. As twilight settled over the ravine, Quentin realized his cattle drive was continuing without him. He'd need to catch up to his men in Columbus, but he couldn't leave Abigail and the newborn alone in the wilderness. "I'll ride to find my men," he explained, returning to the wagon with a cup of coffee he'd brewed. "They can bring help back here." Abigail's face fell. "You're leaving?" "Just temporarily," Quentin assured her. "I'll be back with a proper wagon by morning. You and your boy need a doctor." She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her fear at being left alone. "I've got a pistol in my trunk," she said finally. "I know how to use it." Quentin's estimation of this woman rose considerably. "I'll leave you my rifle too, just in case," he said. "Though there's not much out here but coyotes, and they won't bother you with the fire going." As he prepared to leave, Abigail called him back. "Mr. Foster, what should I name him?" she asked, looking down at her sleeping son. Quentin paused, taken aback by the question. "Don't you have family names to consider?" Abigail's expression clouded. "My husband died before he knew I was carrying, and after today, well, this boy owes his life to you." The sentiment struck Quentin deeply. "My pa's name was Samuel," he offered hesitantly. "Always thought it was a good, strong name." Abigail smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Samuel Porter," she tested the name. "I like it." Quentin mounted his horse with a strange reluctance. Something about this woman and her newborn son pulled at him, making him unusually protective. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised. The ride to Columbus took longer than expected, but Quentin eventually located his men at the cattle pens on the edge of town. They had wondered about his absence but had managed the herd competently. "Boss, where you been?" asked Hank, relief evident in his young face. "We thought maybe outlaws got you." "Found a woman whose wagon crashed," Quentin explained briefly. "She had her baby out there. Need to get Doc Miller and a wagon to bring them to town." The men exchanged surprised glances, unused to their taciturn boss involving himself in other people's troubles. "She alone out there?" asked Fred, the oldest of the hands. "Her husband's dead," Quentin said shortly. "Need one of you to help me bring her in. The others stay with the cattle." In the end, all three insisted on coming to help, leaving the cattle securely penned for the night. The town doctor joined them with his buggy, and by midnight they were making their way back to the ravine, following Quentin's directions. The sight that greeted them filled Quentin with relief. The fire still burned brightly, and Abigail sat propped against the wagon wheel, rifle across her lap, baby Samuel sleeping peacefully in a makeshift sling across her chest. "You came back," she said simply when she saw him, but the gratitude in her eyes spoke volumes. "Said I would," Quentin replied, helping the doctor down from his buggy. Doc Miller examined both mother and child by firelight, declaring them remarkably well given the circumstances. "This little fella's eager to meet the world," he commented, wrapping the baby more securely. "And you, madam, are tougher than most men I know." Quentin's men helped transfer Abigail and Samuel to the doctor's buggy, then set about salvaging what they could from the wrecked wagon. Most of her belongings were intact, though the wagon itself was beyond repair. "Where were you heading?" Quentin asked as they prepared to return to town. "Columbus," Abigail replied. "I have a teaching position waiting there." Quentin nodded. "You've got a place to stay." Abigail's hesitation told him everything. "The school board mentioned rooms above the schoolhouse," she said finally. "But with the baby coming early, you'll stay at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house until you're on your feet," Quentin decided. "I'll cover the cost." "I couldn't possibly consider it a gift for Samuel," he interrupted. "First thing a boy needs is a safe place to sleep." The trip back to Columbus was slow and careful, with Doc Miller insisting on frequent stops to check on his patients. By dawn, they had reached the outskirts of town, the buildings silhouetted against the rising sun. Columbus in 1885 was still a small settlement, though its position near the Mexican border made it a busy trading post. The main street consisted of a general store, saloon, small hotel, and various businesses serving the ranchers and miners in the area. The newly built schoolhouse stood at the far end, a proud symbol of the town's growth. Mrs. Hollister's boarding house sat on a quiet side street, a two-story structure with a wide porch and blue shutters. The proprietress herself appeared at the door as the buggy pulled up, her gray hair neatly pinned and her expression curious at the early morning arrival. "Quentin Foster, what trouble have you brought me now?" she asked, though her tone was kind. "A new teacher for the school and her baby boy," Quentin explained. "They've had a rough journey and need a place to recover." Mrs. Hollister's expression softened at the sight of Abigail and the infant. "Well, bring them in then. I've got a room on the first floor that'll suit them fine." The next week passed in a blur for Abigail. The town of Columbus embraced her and baby Samuel with unexpected warmth. The school board representatives visited, assuring her the position remained hers when she was ready, with no rush given her circumstances. Mrs. Hollister proved to be a godsend, showing Abigail how to bathe and care for her newborn with patient instruction. And then there was Quentin Foster. He visited daily, bringing small gifts: a rocking chair he'd purchased from the general store, a hand-carved wooden cradle from one of his ranch hands who had a talent for woodworking. He sat with Abigail on the boarding house porch in the evenings, telling her about the area while she nursed Samuel. "Your cattle all sold?" she asked on the 7th evening, knowing he'd planned to leave once his business in town was concluded. "Got a fair price," he nodded. "Thought I'd head back to the ranch tomorrow." Abigail felt a pang of disappointment she hadn't expected. "Samuel will miss you," she said. Unable to admit she would miss him too, Quentin looked at the baby sleeping in his new cradle. "He's too young to remember me," he said, though his voice held a note of regret. "I'll make sure he knows the story of the cowboy who delivered him," Abigail promised. Quentin shifted uncomfortably. "About that, I was thinking. My ranch is only about 15 miles outside of town. Decent-sized place, house needs some work but it's solid. There's a room that would make a fine nursery." Abigail stared at him, uncertain of his meaning. "What I'm saying poorly," Quentin continued, "is that teaching's a hard job for a woman alone with an infant, and ranching's a lonely life. Maybe we could help each other." "Mr. Foster, are you proposing some sort of arrangement?" Abigail asked carefully. "An arrangement, yes. Or—" he took a deep breath. "Or marriage if you were amenable. Not right away, of course. We barely know each other. But in time, perhaps." Abigail's heart raced at his unexpected suggestion. "You would marry a woman you just met, a widow with another man's child." "I would marry a brave, beautiful woman who fought to give her son a better life," Quentin said firmly. "And Samuel may not be my blood, but I helped bring him into this world. That creates a bond of its own." Abigail considered his words carefully. She had come to Columbus seeking independence, not another marriage. Yet something about Quentin Foster's steadiness appealed to her. He wasn't asking for an immediate decision, merely opening a door to possibility. "I need to establish myself here first," she said finally. "Begin teaching, provide for Samuel on my own terms." Quentin nodded, accepting her response without disappointment. "The offer stands whenever you're ready to consider it," he said. "In the meantime, I'd like to call on you properly if you're willing." "I think I'd like that," Abigail admitted with a small smile. The following morning, Quentin departed for his ranch, promising to return in 2 weeks' time. Abigail watched him ride away from the boarding house porch, Samuel cradled against her shoulder, and wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. Autumn settled over Columbus as Abigail began her teaching position. The schoolhouse was a single room with 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old. She brought Samuel with her each day, keeping him in his cradle beside her desk. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows initially, but the children quickly became protective of their teacher's baby, the older girls especially eager to help tend to him during breaks. True to his word, Quentin returned to town every 2 weeks, timing his visits with supply runs. He courted Abigail with respectful determination, bringing her wildflowers, taking her and Samuel for buggy rides around the countryside, and sharing Sunday dinner at the boarding house. As winter approached, Abigail found herself looking forward to his visits with increasing anticipation. She learned about his past, how he had fought briefly for the Confederacy as a very young man, then sought a fresh start in the West. How he had worked as a ranch hand for years before saving enough to buy his own land. How he had built his operation through hard work and fair dealing. "You've never thought to marry before?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire in Mrs. Hollister's parlor, Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle. Came close once, Quentin admitted. Girl named Margaret back in '79. Her family moved to California before we could make it official. You didn't follow her, had just bought the ranch, he explained. Everything I owned was tied up in that land, couldn't leave it and she couldn't stay, he shrugged. Maybe it wasn't meant to be. Abigail understood the sacrifice. Her late husband Thomas had been kind but unremarkable, a marriage of convenience more than passion. She had respected him and mourned his death sincerely, but the feelings developing for Quentin were entirely different, deeper and more complex. The first snow fell in early December, blanketing Columbus in white. The schoolhouse closed for a week when the stove broke, giving Abigail unexpected free time. On the second day of the closure, Quentin appeared at the boarding house with a proposition. Thought you and Samuel might like to see the ranch, he suggested. Weather's clear enough for travel, and I've fixed up the buggy with extra blankets. Abigail hesitated only briefly before accepting. The prospect of seeing Quentin's home intrigued her, offering a glimpse of what life might be like should she accept his still-standing offer. The journey took 3 hours, with a stop midway to feed and change Samuel. As they crested a small rise, Quentin pointed ahead to a valley where a modest but well-maintained ranch spread before them. A 2-story house stood in the center, surrounded by corrals, a barn, and several outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, and even from a distance it exuded a sense of welcome. It's lovely, Abigail said honestly. Better in spring when everything's green, Quentin replied, though she could hear the pride in his voice. But it's home. As they drew closer, Abigail saw a middle-aged woman emerge from the house, waving enthusiastically. Mrs. Diaz, Quentin explained. Comes in 3 times a week to cook and clean. Makes sure I don't live like a complete savage. Her husband Miguel is my foreman, best horseman in the territory. The interior of the ranch house surprised Abigail. Though clearly a bachelor's residence, it was clean and well appointed, with solid furniture and even a few touches of refinement like bound books on shelves and framed landscapes on the walls. My mother insisted I learn to appreciate beauty as well as utility, Quentin explained when he caught her examining a particularly fine painting. Said a man's surroundings shape his character. Mrs. Diaz had prepared a welcoming meal of beef stew and fresh bread, which they enjoyed at the large oak table in the dining room. Afterward, Quentin gave Abigail a tour of the house, ending at a room he'd clearly been saving for last. This would be the nursery, he said, opening the door to reveal a sunny corner room with windows facing east and south. It was currently used for storage, but Abigail could envision it transformed the cradle beside a window, a rocking chair where she could nurse Samuel while watching the sunrise. The thought startled her with its vividness and appeal. It's a wonderful house, Quentin, she said sincerely. Could be a wonderful home, he replied, his meaning clear. They stood in comfortable silence until Samuel's fussing from downstairs broke the moment. The rest of the day passed pleasantly, with Quentin showing Abigail around the ranch grounds and introducing her to Miguel Diaz and the 2 other permanent hands who lived in a bunkhouse near the barn. As twilight approached, Mrs. Diaz prepared the guest room for Abigail and Samuel, insisting on placing a vase of dried flowers on the dresser to make it pretty for the lady. The simple kindness touched Abigail deeply. That night, as she nursed Samuel in the unfamiliar room, Abigail found herself contemplating a future she hadn't imagined possible after Thomas's death. Could she find happiness here as Quentin's wife? Would Samuel thrive in this remote but beautiful place? The teaching position had been her lifeline. Her path to independence, was she ready to set it aside? Morning brought clarity with its golden light streaming through the guest room windows. Abigail rose early to find Quentin already at work in the barn. She watched from the porch as he moved with confident efficiency among the animals, stopping occasionally to speak with Miguel about the day's tasks. "He is a good man," Mrs. Diaz said, appearing beside Abigail with a cup of coffee. "Lonely, though. Ranch needs a woman's touch, a child's laughter." Abigail accepted the coffee with a smile. "You think we would be happy here? Happiness takes work, like anything worthwhile," the older woman replied wisely. "But yes, I think there is good soil here for happiness to grow." The return to Columbus later that day was filled with comfortable conversation. Quentin sharing stories of his early days on the ranch while Abigail described her childhood in Pennsylvania. It felt natural, this exchange of histories and perspectives, building a bridge between their separate pasts. As they approached town, Abigail made her decision. "I would like to accept your proposal," she said suddenly, interrupting Quentin's tale about a particularly stubborn horse. He pulled the buggy to a stop, turning to face her with surprise. "You're certain?" "I am," she nodded. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "I want to finish the school year," Abigail said firmly. "The children deserve consistency, and I've given my word to the school board." Quentin nodded. "That's only fair. What else?" "I want to continue teaching, perhaps not immediately, but eventually. Perhaps when Samuel is older, or for the children at nearby ranches if coming to town daily isn't practical." "Education matters," Quentin agreed. "We could set up a schoolroom at the ranch for neighboring families if you wished." His ready acceptance of her terms strengthened Abigail's conviction that she was making the right choice. "Then yes, Quentin Foster, I will marry you. Samuel and I will make our home with you." The smile that spread across Quentin's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory," he said, reaching for her hand. They decided on a spring wedding, giving Abigail time to complete her teaching commitment and Quentin opportunity to prepare the ranch for his new family. The engagement announcement created a stir in Columbus partly because Abigail had been in town less than 6 months, but mostly because Quentin Foster, confirmed bachelor and one of the area's most eligible ranchers, was finally settling down. Winter gave way to spring, with Quentin's visits becoming more frequent as their wedding day approached. He expanded the house, adding a proper bathroom with indoor plumbing that impressed even the wealthiest families in Columbus. The nursery was transformed with fresh paint and new furniture, and Quentin surprised Abigail by ordering wallpaper with a pattern of small blue sailboats from a catalog. "Thought the boy should know there's more to the world than cattle and desert," he explained when she questioned the nautical theme. "Maybe we'll take him to see the ocean someday." The wedding took place on the first Saturday in April 1886. With the entire town turning out for the ceremony in Columbus's small church. Samuel, now 6 months old and thriving, wore a miniature suit that matched Quentin's and spent the ceremony alternating between curious observation and attempts to eat the flower pinned to his collar. Reverend Hollister, Mrs. Hollister's husband and the town's part-time preacher, officiated, speaking movingly about new beginnings and families forged through both blood and choice. When Quentin placed the ring on Abigail's finger, a simple gold band with tiny embedded sapphires that had belonged to his mother, his hands trembled slightly, betraying the depth of his emotion. "I take you, Abigail Porter, to be my lawful wedded wife," he said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Abigail repeated her vows with equal conviction, aware that their union was unusual in its beginnings, but feeling with absolute certainty that it was right. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin kissed her with a gentle reverence that brought tears to her eyes. The celebration continued at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, where tables laden with food spilled from the dining room onto the porch and yard. Samuel was passed from admiring arms to admiring arms, clearly enjoying his role as the most celebrated baby in Columbus. Late in the afternoon, as the party continued, Quentin found Abigail sitting quietly on a bench beneath a cottonwood tree, watching the revelry from a distance. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Foster?" he asked, sitting beside her. Her new name brought a smile to her face. "Not at all, Mr. Foster. Just taking a moment to marvel at life's unexpected turns. 6 months ago, you were alone in a crashed wagon giving birth," he nodded. "And I was a confirmed bachelor with no thought of family. And now here we are," Abigail said, leaning against his shoulder. "A family. Speaking of which," Quentin said, clearing his throat, "I have something for Samuel." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Inside lay a pocket watch, silver and gleaming in the afternoon light. "It was my father's," Quentin explained. "And his father's before him. I want Samuel to have it as my son and heir." Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "You would give your family heirloom to another man's child." "No," Quentin said firmly. "I'm giving it to my son. From this day forward, Samuel is a Foster in all but name, and if you're agreeable, I'd like to make that official too." The depth of Quentin's commitment to her son overwhelmed Abigail. She had hoped he would care for Samuel, treat him kindly as a stepfather should, but this complete acceptance went beyond her expectations. "I would be honored for Samuel to carry your name," she whispered. "As would his father, I believe. Thomas would want his son to have a father who loves him." The following morning, Quentin, Abigail, and Samuel departed for the ranch, their home now, truly. The journey felt different this time, charged with the knowledge that they were traveling not as visitors, but as a family returning to their rightful place. Spring turned to summer, and Abigail adapted to ranch life with surprising ease. The rhythm of the days suited her: early mornings with Quentin before he headed out to work, quiet afternoons with Samuel, evenings spent together on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in fiery hues. She took an interest in the operation of the ranch, learning about cattle breeding and management from Quentin, who proved to be a patient teacher. When Samuel began crawling, Quentin built a small fenced area on the porch where the baby could play safely while Abigail worked in the garden she had established. Their first disagreement came in August, when a severe drought threatened the cattle. Quentin worked from dawn until well after dark, often returning too exhausted for more than a quick meal before collapsing into bed. "You're going to work yourself to death," Abigail said one night when he stumbled in past midnight, his face gray with fatigue. "No choice," he replied tersely. "We lose the herd, we lose everything." "Then hire more help," she insisted. "The money from my teaching, I won't use your savings," Quentin interrupted, a flash of pride in his tired eyes. "This is my responsibility." "Our responsibility," Abigail corrected. "We're partners now, remember." For better or worse. The argument continued, with Quentin insisting he could manage and Abigail equally insistent that accepting help wasn't weakness. They went to bed angry for the first time, backs turned to each other in the darkness. Morning found Quentin still asleep when Abigail rose, unusual for a man normally up before sunrise. She let him rest, taking Samuel to the kitchen where Mrs. Diaz was already preparing breakfast. "Men," the older woman said knowingly when Abigail explained the previous night's argument. "They think the weight of the world must rest on their shoulders alone." "How do I make him see reason?" Abigail asked, bouncing Samuel on her knee. "Let him come to it himself," Mrs. Diaz advised. But perhaps Miguel could mention how Senor Thompson at the next ranch hired extra hands during last year's drought and saved not only his cattle but his health. The gentle manipulation worked. 3 days later, Quentin hired 2 additional cowboys to help move the cattle to better grazing land near the mountains. The crisis passed, the herd survived, and Quentin admitted, though not in so many words, that Abigail had been right. "Partnership takes practice," she told him as they lay in bed that night, his arm around her waist. "We'll get better at it." "Already learning," he murmured against her hair. "You make me a better man, Abby." The nickname, used for the first time, warmed her heart. "And you make me a stronger woman, Quentin." Their first Christmas as a family brought a surprise visit from the school board representatives, who arrived at the ranch with an unexpected proposal. Enrollment in Columbus had grown beyond what one teacher could manage, and they hoped to persuade Abigail to return part-time to teach the younger children. "We could arrange for sessions 3 days a week," explained Mr. Jenkins, the board president. "And of course, young Samuel would be welcome in the classroom with you." Abigail looked to Quentin, uncertain. They hadn't discussed her returning to teaching so soon. "Sounds like they need you," he said simply. "If it's what you want, we'll make it work." The arrangement proved beneficial for everyone. Abigail enjoyed the intellectual stimulation of teaching again, while still having ample time at the ranch. Quentin adjusted his schedule to be home on the days she traveled to town, often using the opportunity to conduct business in Columbus while she taught. Samuel thrived with the additional attention from the schoolchildren, who treated him like a class mascot. By his first birthday in May 1887, he was walking confidently and attempting simple words "ma" and "pa" among his first, to Quentin's undisguised delight. The legal adoption was finalized that same month, with Samuel officially becoming Samuel Thomas Foster. Abigail had insisted on keeping her late husband's name as Samuel's middle name, a gesture Quentin supported without hesitation. "A boy should know his history," he said when they discussed it. "All parts of it." Summer brought the welcome news that Abigail was expecting their second child, due in early February. Quentin's reaction, a moment of stunned silence followed by a whoop of joy that startled the chickens in the yard, became one of Abigail's favorite memories. "Think Samuel will mind sharing his parents?" Quentin asked that evening as they sat on the porch, watching their son toddle after a butterfly. "Children are more adaptable than we give them credit for," Abigail replied. "Besides, he'll be nearly 2 by then, practically a grown man by his reckoning." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Abigail reduced her teaching schedule as winter approached. Unlike her first pregnancy, this one was marked by support and celebration rather than uncertainty and grief. Quentin hovered attentively, reading medical texts to prepare for any eventuality, though they had arranged for Doc Miller to attend the birth at the ranch. The baby, a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose Foster, arrived punctually in the first week of February 1888 during a rare desert snowstorm. Unlike Samuel's dramatic entrance into the world, Elizabeth's birth was relatively straightforward, with Doc Miller arriving in plenty of time and Quentin pacing nervously outside the bedroom door with Samuel in his arms. "You have a sister," Quentin told his son when they were finally allowed into the room. "That means you're a big brother now." Samuel, not quite 2 and limited in his vocabulary, simply pointed at the bundle in Abigail's arms and announced, "Baby," with definitive authority. The ranch grew and prospered along with the Foster family. By 1890, Quentin had expanded his herd significantly and built a larger barn to accommodate the operation. Abigail continued teaching part-time while raising their children, finding a balance that fulfilled her both professionally and personally. Samuel started school in Columbus at age 6, riding proudly beside Quentin or Abigail 3 days a week. His natural intelligence and curiosity made him an excellent student, though his tendency to question authority occasionally tested his teacher's patience. "Gets that from you," Quentin told Abigail after one particularly pointed note home about Samuel's excessive inquiries during history lessons. "I believe you were the one who gave him that book about ancient civilizations that started all these questions," Abigail countered with a smile. Elizabeth, 3 years younger than her brother, proved to be Quentin's shadow from the moment she could walk, following him around the ranch and insisting on helping with his chores. By age 4, she could identify every animal on the property and had strong opinions about which horses were her favorites. In the spring of 1893, with Samuel 8 and Elizabeth 5, the Foster family welcomed another addition, twin boys they named James and William. The double blessing came with double the work, but the entire household adjusted with good humor to the demands of 2 infants. 4 children, Quentin marveled one evening as they sat exhausted but content after finally getting all the children to bed. "If someone had told me 10 years ago that I'd be the father of 4, I'd have thought they were touched in the head." "And now?" Abigail asked, leaning against him on the porch swing. "Now I can't imagine any other life," he said honestly. "Though I wouldn't object if these 2 boys sleep through the night sometime before their college years." The twins eventually did sleep through the night, and life settled into a new normal for the Foster family. The ranch continued to thrive, allowing Quentin to hire additional hands and ease his own workload as he entered his mid-40s. Abigail expanded her teaching to include not only the Columbus School, but also sessions at the ranch for the children of neighboring properties. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's intelligence and his adoptive father's practical nature. At 16, he announced his intention to study veterinary medicine, inspired by his years helping with the ranch animals. "Denver's got a good program," Quentin said when they discussed options. "Close enough to visit but far enough for independence." "You're not disappointed he doesn't want to take over the ranch?" Abigail asked privately later. "Ranch will be here if he changes his mind," Quentin shrugged. "But a man should follow his own path. Besides, the twins show every sign of being born ranchers, and Elizabeth has better business sense at 13 than most grown men I know." Their children's future paths would unfold in their own time, but as Abigail and Quentin celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary in April 1901, they reflected on the journey that had brought them together. "That wagon crash was the luckiest accident of my life," Abigail admitted as they sat alone in the parlor after the children had gone to bed, "though I certainly didn't think so at the time." "Fate has strange ways," Quentin agreed, taking her hand in his. "I was just riding to check on my cattle and found my future instead." "Do you ever regret it?" Abigail asked, a rare moment of vulnerability. Taking on another man's widow and child, building this life from such unusual beginnings, Quentin's answer came without hesitation. "Not for a single moment. The day I helped Samuel into this world was the day my real life began, though I didn't know it yet." He reached for the small package he'd hidden earlier, presenting it to her with a smile. "Happy anniversary, Abby." Inside the box lay a delicate silver locket. When opened, it contained a miniature photograph of Samuel as a newborn on one side and a recent family portrait on the other, the visual story of their beginning and what they had built together. "It's perfect," Abigail whispered, tears in her eyes. "Like the family we've made," Quentin said, helping her fasten it around her neck. Not perfect in the way of fairy tales, perhaps, but perfect for us. As they sat together watching the fire burn low in the grate, Abigail reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led her here: a desperate widow in a crashed wagon, a cowboy who stopped to help, and the life they had forged from that chance encounter. The journey hadn't always been smooth, but it had always been worth it. Outside, the desert night wrapped around their home like a protective blanket. Stars scattered across the sky like promises kept and yet to be made. Inside, the evidence of their shared life surrounded them: children's toys, books read together, furniture that had witnessed both arguments and reconciliations, photographs marking the milestones of their family's growth. From disaster had come deliverance, from strangers had come family, from uncertainty had come a life more fulfilling than either could have imagined that day by the wrecked wagon. It wasn't the life Abigail had planned when she set out for Columbus as a pregnant widow, nor the solitary existence Quentin had expected as a bachelor rancher. It was better. In the years that followed, as their children grew and the 20th century brought changes both challenging and exciting to the Southwest, Abigail and Quentin maintained the partnership they had built, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating successes together, and facing the future with the same determination that had carried them through their unusual beginning. Samuel graduated with honors from veterinary school in Denver and returned to establish a practice in Columbus that served ranchers throughout the region. His expertise with cattle made him particularly valuable to the community, and his combination of formal education and practical ranch experience earned him widespread respect. Elizabeth surprised everyone by announcing her intention to study law, a bold choice for a young woman in 1908. With her parents' unwavering support, she completed her education in Santa Fe and became one of New Mexico Territory's few female attorneys, specializing in property and water rights cases that directly impacted ranching families. The twins, James and William, did indeed follow their father into ranching, though with modern innovations that sometimes baffled Quentin. They expanded the Foster holdings considerably, implementing new breeding techniques and eventually adding sheep to diversify the operation, a decision that initially scandalized their father but ultimately proved financially sound. On warm summer evenings, the extended Foster family often gathered on the expanded ranch house porch, Quentin and Abigail in the swing they'd installed when Elizabeth was born, their grown children with spouses and children of their own filling the surrounding chairs and steps. Sometimes Samuel would bring out the silver pocket watch Quentin had given him as a wedding gift all those years ago, using it to time the races his own children ran across the yard. "Did I ever tell you kids about the day your brother was born?" Quentin would ask the grandchildren during these gatherings, though they'd all heard the story countless times. "In a crashed wagon," the youngest would chorus, already familiar with the family legend. "That's right," Quentin would nod. "Your grandmother's wagon went off the trail, and I happened along just in time. Just in time to deliver me and fall in love with Mother," Samuel would add with a wink to Abigail. "Well, the falling in love took a little longer," Abigail would correct, though the sparkle in her eyes belied her practical tone. "But not much longer." As twilight deepened into night and stars appeared over the desert, Quentin would often find Abigail's hand in the darkness, their fingers entwining with the comfortable familiarity of decades together. Sometimes no words were needed, just the shared understanding of two people who had journeyed far together from that desperate day by the wrecked wagon. Other times, he would lean close and whisper, "Best detour I ever took, Mrs. Foster," making her smile even after all these years. and Abigail would squeeze his hand in return, grateful beyond words for the cowboy who had delivered not only her son but her heart to safety, who had helped her build a life rich with love and purpose from the wreckage of her former existence. From disaster had come their greatest blessing, a truth they never forgot, even as silver threaded their hair and lines of laughter etched their faces. Their story, begun in crisis and crafted through choice and commitment, stood as testament to the unexpected ways love could find and transform two lives, creating from separate paths a shared journey neither would have walked alone.